Hello. To whom are Jehovah's Witnesses captive? Ray takes up that theme in the next paragraph. One might think that the extreme position taken in the September 1, 1980 letter, earlier quoted, conveyed to all elders by the traveling representatives, would produce, if not a storm of protest, at least some measurable expression of dismay from elders and others. They were too well trained for that to be the case. Some few individuals did express themselves, but cautiously, lest they should also receive the label of apostate. Certainly the lack of protest was not because they had proved to themselves that this was the good and acceptable and perfect will of God, as the apostle urges. That's a quote, by the way, from Romans 12, verse 2. Regarding rereading this paragraph on page 2, one finds not a single scripture advanced as proof that such thought control policy has any scriptural support. The Christian's thoughts are to be brought into captivity to the Christ, not to men or to an organization. That also is a citation from Paul, this time 2 Corinthians 10, verse 5. Why then this willingness to surrender one's conscience to such total control? It is the concept of the organization that produces this. That concept creates the belief that, to all intents and purposes, whatever the organization speaks, it is as if God himself were speaking. Perhaps epitomizing the spirit that the Society's pronouncements, including this letter, produced is an incident occurring at a circuit assembly meeting for elders at a section of Alabama. The district overseer, Bart Thompson, held up a Society publication that had a green cover. He then said to the assembly of elders, "If the Society told me that this book is black instead of green, I would say, you know, I could have sworn that it was green. But if the Society says it's black, then it is black." Others have used similar illustrations. Which reminds me of my very first time in field service back in a blustery and wet day. I think it was in the spring of 1971. Before I was baptized, I went out in field service with my study conductor. And also with us was the congregation overseer. In those days, there was only one congregation overseer. This was the year before the new arrangement came in, where a number of elders were usually appointed in every congregation. And this congregation overseer, whose name was Ron Hiller, was an impressive man, rotund and rather jolly. And I'd heard him give public talks, and I'd heard him speaking fairly frequently in the congregation in the meetings I'd already attended. And I sat down over coffee with him and Bob, my study conductor, at our break time, and wanted to tell him a little bit of how I came to be coming to the Kingdom Hall and my hippie history, etc. And I said to him that the first thing that impressed me about the Watchtower was their pacifism. And immediately, without a pause, Ron said, no, we're not pacifists. If the Society told me to take up a gun, I would take it up. And when I heard that, I remember feeling cold and parking that remark for many years until, of course, I started to have my doubts about the organization and thinking to myself, I should have made more of it back then. But Bart Thompson here is essentially parking that thought before circuit overseers and district overseers and other elders, that what the Society says is. And this is very similar to the Orwellian concept of newspeak. If you haven't gotten a familiarity with that, 1984 is required reading, or at least a summary of it, because you may have heard of a book that was published years back that doesn't seem to be much talked about anymore, called The Orwellian World of Jehovah's Witnesses by the Bottings. Check that book out. And Ray goes on, true, there are many thinking witnesses who are repelled by such blatant expressions of blind faith. Yet most are still willing to conform, even to take judicial action against any who express doubts about the Society's interpretations. Why? I try in my own mind and heart to understand the feelings of all these persons, including those on the governing body. Based on my own experience among them, I believe that they are, in effect, the captives of a concept. The concept or mental image they have of the organization seems almost to take on a personality of its own, so that the concept itself controls them, moves them, or restrains them, by molding their thinking, their attitudes, their judgments. I do not believe that many of them would take the position they now take if they thought only in terms of God, Christ, the Bible, and the interests not of an organization, but of their Christian brothers, fellow humans. The insertion of the existing concept of the organization, however, radically alters their thinking and viewpoint, becomes in effect the dominant controlling force. Or Ray might as well say, org has become an idol, which we have said in a number of our videos. When it controls you and when it is the dominant image in your imagination, that's what it is. It's an idol. I believe that when the men on the governing body think about and refer to the organization, they likewise think of the concept rather than the reality. They think of the organization as something far bigger and grander than themselves, thinking of it in its numerical aspect, in the extent of its scope of control is sometimes international and worldwide. They do not realize, apparently, that this aspect relates more to the organization's domain than to what it actually is. When, however, they urge loyalty to the organization, they must know, they certainly should know, that they are not talking about that domain, about the thousands of congregations and their members that the organization directs. They're talking about loyalty to the source of the direction, the source of the teachings, the source of the authority. Whether the governing body members acknowledge it or whether they prefer not to think about it, the fact remains that in these crucial respects, they, and they alone, are the organization. Whatever other authority exists, that of the branch committees, that of the district or circuit overseers, that of congregational elder bodies, that authority is totally dependent on them, subject to adjustment, change, removal at their decision, unilaterally with no questions asked. The apostle in Romans chapter 13 says that earthly government should stand placed rather in their relative positions by God. His words could be compared to the above situation, for all the existing authorities within the organization stand placed in their relative positions by the governing body, subject entirely to its control. In the next segment, more on this mischievous, and some would say malicious, concept of org.